So next up is Dr. Shawn Reynolds. He's doing a presentation on mental health concerns in adolescents. Dr. Shawn Reynolds is a psychologist in private practice in Sherwood Park with the Nexus Psychology Group, and also works part-time as a consultant with St. Albert Public Schools. He served as Alberta Health Services Psychology Professional Practice Council for 3 years while working as psychology team lead at the Glen Rose. Dr. Reynolds' practice currently focuses on psychoeducational assessments with children and youth, presentations on autism and other child-focused disorders, and a small therapy niche in body-focused repetitive behaviors, like trichotillomania. He is married with 2 girls and has remnants of a strange Southern American accent, but feels very blessed to now live in Canada. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Shawn Reynolds.
All right, good morning, everyone. There's just a little tiny bit of that accent left, but I can pull it out anytime I need to, so if y'all need it, just let me know. So, putting together this presentation, looking at mental health concerns for kids, and looking at, I started putting it together, and I'm going to focus today on mood and anxiety in particular. These are 2 particular challenges that are kind of the biggies for kids with autism, and in 15, 20 minutes, I don't want to go too far, so I'll stick with those 2 as the primary ones. But it was a little bit concerning to me, and it's something that I just worry about in general in psychology. We get a lot of focus in how to move kids that are having real substantial, big challenges. But I want to be clear that not all kids with autism have major mental health challenges. There's a real spectrum in terms of how all of us are able to manage our mental health and with the particular risk factors that we all have. And so I wanted to make sure that I'm not just focusing on the real severe difficulties that can happen for kids with autism. These are difficulties that can happen for kids without autism as well. But also looking at it from a little bit of a strength-based model as well of what are the things that our kids are good at, how can we use those to help enhance their mental health. So when I think of mental health intervention, the training that I'd received in grad school, and most of what my practice focuses on, is how do we take someone that's got a severe impairment in some area, and how do we move them up to where they're at a functional level, which I've used the technical term for halfway decent, which I'm not sure if that's in the DSM or not. But what we're looking for is just, can we get them to, can they be in a classroom and can they do okay there? And this is important. This is definitely important for kids where there's a severe impairment, for adults where there's a severe impairment, but that's not all that mental health is. The other part of mental health is, how do you move from halfway decent to excellent? How do you go from good to great? And so I want to try to tailor this for your kids wherever they fall on that. So if for all of us, we have mental health, we have some strengths that we've got, and we've got some challenges as well. So even if your child wouldn't qualify for any kind of diagnosis, how do you move them from good to great? How can they be functioning at the best level, where they're as happy as they can be, where they manage stress as well as they can, and to where they're able to achieve all the things that we're looking for them to achieve. So a part of this, I want to just kind of open this up to you guys very quickly. What are some of the strengths that you see for kids with ASD? We talk about challenges, and lots of focus on that, but there's some good stuff with it too. What are some things that you guys see with your kids, or that you've seen with kids in general? Yeah. A curiosity. Yeah, there'll be an interest in things that may be different than that other kids do. Okay. What else? Memory is a nice one. Yeah, lots of nods, laughs, yeah. And it's memory, especially in that area of focused interest, which can be awesome. Yeah, so attention to detail, and the later speakers will talk about the attentional abilities and challenges for kids on the spectrum. And we know that ADHD is at increased incidence now that with the new DSM, you can diagnose both at once. But what we often see is that, well, their attention on the things the teacher is asking for is not great. The attention on the things that they're interested in is spectacular. So just thinking about the strengths for your kiddos as well, as we're going through this. Some of the things that I've seen are perseverance. So in the area that they're very interested in, they really want to do that, and they want to do it well, and they can go into it in a ton of detail. A child who can recite statistics of the 84 Oilers, that's pretty cool. This ability to focus on an area of interest, and this creates challenges for us for kids in elementary school. When we are in when we're working with our younger kids that are in elementary school, we want to create a base set of skills in terms of literacy, numeracy, and social skills. And so I'm going to draw a contrast between what we do in elementary school versus what adulthood looks like. The things that we stink at in elementary school, if you're not good in math, what do we do about that? What do we as adults do? Not good in math? Let's get you some more math. We're going to do some extra intervention for you. If you're not good in social skills, what do? Let's put you in a group with other kids that have challenges in social skills. Oh, that'll be great. And these are good things to do because we're trying to get kids up to that basic functional level in adulthood. As adults, though, how many things do you have to be good at to make a career? You know? You need one thing that you're really awesome with. If you love dinosaurs and you can become a paleontologist, you can really ride that a long way. And so this can be a strength or a challenge, is having that real area of focused interest. But I try to look at that for kids about how can this be turned into something that's functional. It's a real pain that he's not doing anything but looking at dinosaurs when he's supposed to be doing creative writing. Later on, is that something that I can build into a strength? So just want to think about that for our kiddos. Nonconformity. This is again a strength and a challenge. We have kids that will have interests in things, and they really don't give a rip if anyone else is interested in them. My youngest is the girl not on the spectrum, and I noticed when she moved from kindergarten to grade 1, kindergarten she loved Dora. Everything was Dora, Dora, Dora. And by day 3 of grade 1, Dora was gone. There was no more Dora in our house because Dora was not cool anymore. And our kids on the spectrum really don't care quite so much about how cool things are. And that's neat. It gets them into trouble socially, but it's nice to have a perspective where we're not going to be so concerned about what other people are thinking. This ability to take a unique perspective is a really good thing. So it's a creative way, not necessarily creativity in play, but creativity in terms of the way that you're looking at the world. And that's a nice thing. And we've talked already about memory and attention detail. So I bring these up because I just want for you to, when you're thinking about the mental health challenges, to think as well about what these strengths are for your kids. How can you use these to help develop them so that they're less likely to have these challenges later on? So some of the biggies with mental health concerns. Mood challenges, and we're going to flesh those out a bit more. Social connections, and it's especially when these are desired but not obtained, and especially in moving out of early elementary school. A little bit of research that seems to show that in Div 1, so for kids in grades 1 through 3, they still get invited to birthday parties, they still are brought in on things in the classroom, and things look like they're going well. And then in grade 4, there's a little bit of a split. You find that groups tend to establish a bit more, and our kids can miss out on those kinds of things. There are some kids with the previous thinking, I believe, with kids on the spectrum, was that when they're just not interested in making friends. And that there may be some of that, but a lot of what I see are kids who are interested in making friends and don't have the basic skills to be able to do so successfully. And so they move into other areas like doing online gaming or doing things on a computer where those skills are not needed. For all of us, the things that we stink at, we kind of do less of because you get frustrated banging your head against the wall. So the mental health concern comes in when you've got a desire to make friends and you're not able to be successful in doing that. Academic challenges can come in, so some of these relate to cognitive challenges for the group of kids that are nonverbal or who have limitations in terms of their cognitive ability, weakness compared with their peers. For kids that don't have the cognitive weakness, often the academic challenges come in because they'll be interested in things that are not what the teacher is necessarily teaching about. Frustration with medical difficulties. Take a show of hands. How many people get cranky when they hurt? Okay, some people are raising their hands, some people are lying. We know about kids on the spectrum having an increase of challenges with GI issues. For anyone that's nonverbal, I've not had the experience of trying to explain medical symptoms to someone that didn't speak a language that I spoke, but I can imagine that would be really, really frustrating. And so for any of us, when we have medical challenges and there's pain that's not being sufficiently addressed, that's really hard. And then anxiety. We're going to flesh that out quite a bit. And this can happen with or without a diagnosis. So some of the things that happen that are not at a clinical level, but which can create a lot of anxiety. Test anxiety is a big one. The next word is perfectionism, and if your eyes got big when you saw that, then you might want to just check and make sure that you're not passing any of those traits along with your child. I certainly had difficulty typing it. Spell check wasn't very happy with me. But we know that this creates challenges. When I want things done just a certain way, and it's not done just like that. I had to mail a package on Monday, and it was supposed to arrive on Wednesday because Canada Post said 2 days. And so I called my friend, did it arrive on Wednesday? No, it didn't. Well, I have a lot of upset about this. Fortunately, my friend is a lot more laid back than I am, and so it turned out okay. But these are things that can interfere with my mental health if I perseverate over them. We know our kids on the spectrum do have that challenge with perseveration, which again can be a strength or a challenge. Rigidity we know of. And then this fear of new or unusual situations. So going to a birthday party, going to a sleepover, going into a situation where the sensory inputs are going to be a lot different can create anxiety either before the activity or in the midst of the activity. So I want to talk a bit about what are some protective factors in these areas. What are things that we can do that are going to make it easier for our kids to be able to manage these? So starting off with mood. Thinking of enjoyable activities that focus in the areas of strength and interest. So for most of us, when we're feeling crummy, a good strategy is to do stuff that you like doing. You don't need a PhD to be able to figure that out, but we tend to not do it. When I get cranky and I'm not in a good mood, I tend to sulk. And my wife will say, why don't you listen to that new album that you just bought that you've been waiting 6 months for? Okay, yeah, I'll do that. And then I do it, and then I'm enjoying myself more. We tend to get stuck when our mood is low, and our problem-solving strategies tend to not be great. This is true for our kids on the spectrum as well. When you've got kids that are verbal, you can get them to describe what these are. When you've got kids that are nonverbal, it's often useful just to even have a list of stuff that they're good at, to know the things that you can go to. Maintaining appropriate physical activity. Dr. Rinaldi talked just a little bit about this, but this is a real basic one for all of us. Being active, getting sunlight, not when it's snowing, that's a different talk. But being able to do stuff to where you're being physically active, we know this is a protective factor for mental health in a lot of ways. Helping the child to avoid perseveration on the negative thing by balancing it with positive. So when we get stuck on something that's negative, how do we balance that? How do we counteract that? A strategy that I'll use at home with one of my kids is if you're going to say something negative about school, then you need to say something positive to balance it out. All of us can get stuck on the bad things that happen at school or at work. So we want to make sure that we're seeing life in a balanced way, not in a Pollyanna, everything is awesome sort of way, but in a balanced way. When we're giving activities to do that are difficult, balancing the enjoyable activities with the harder tasks. None of us like doing hard task. That's why if you have kids and you're using a visuals or a task script, we do something hard, something easy, something hard, break, something hard, something easy. When you get a math test, if you're doing a math test, if you remember from high school, generally teachers will not give you the hardest stuff at the beginning. They kind of backload it and they'll balance it with giving you some low-lying fruit that's easier to solve. We pick our battles. We want to allow extra time on these perseverative activities that are enjoyable for the child. Anyone have a hobby? Do you spend too much time on the hobby sometimes? Yeah. Is that normal? Yeah, it kind of is. So we can look at hobbies as if I'm doing something. The hobbies that I personally have, I think are awesome. And when I see other people with hobbies, I think that's weird and non-functional. Same for our kids on the spectrum as well. When they're doing these things that seem unusual, that are unusual, but they're working well for them. So we don't want to give them 8 hours a day of doing any particular activity, but we want to give them some opportunity to be able to do that. And knowing those self-soothing activities and objects that can help. So examples are music, a favorite stuffy, having family contact. Sometimes not having family contact is a good thing. And that doesn't mean like never having family contact, putting them in the basement. That's bad parenting. But having a good balance of how much contact is helpful. With one of my kids, when she gets upset, talking about it is absolutely the worst thing that I can do. And so what do I do as a psychologist? Well, I keep pressing for questions. And any of you that have a tween know that when you do this is kind of a bad strategy. But I'll perseverate with it. I have to really check myself because I think if we could just talk about it, we could solve this problem. I'm a psychologist. I'm good at this. And so I'll say, well, so what bothers you? And so any of you that have a tween know what this is on or off the spectrum. With anxiety, we want to emphasize the problem-solving strategies. So what's the stuff that works when we get anxious? What I know doesn't work is when I wake up at 4 in the morning and start thinking about it. When I'm going to sleep thinking about it, that's a really bad time for me to solve problems. A better time is when I've got all of my cognitive abilities with me, when it's earlier in the day, and when I can talk to someone who can help me out with this. So in general, the idea of doing something about it rather than perseverating on it, this idea of scheduling the worry sometimes can be a helpful strategy. We're not going to talk about that right now. I've blocked off from 7:30 to 7:45 tonight, and we're going to talk about that, which sounds silly, but is a very nice way of getting kids to be able to control their thinking. Remembering the resilience building events. So the way that we build resilience is that we do stuff that sucks and then you survive. It's really hard because for our kids, we have this tendency to bubble wrap them. I don't want my kids to experience any pain at all, but I know that through that pain, that's how they're going to be able to progress and to be able to manage stuff when they're away from my house, when they're 30. We don't provide constant reassurance. This sounds mean because reassurance is one of those things that seems to help, but you only want to provide enough to where you're giving them that kind of initial pat on the back, but we don't just over and over and over again, because what happens is you get a cycle of child gets worried, parent reassures, kid says, okay. 5 minutes later, child gets worried, parent reassures, child says, okay, but they never learn self-soothing strategies to manage that anxiety themselves. We want to look at the cognitive errors. I could do about an hour on this first bullet, but I'm going to do it in about 10 seconds. Is your child overestimating the likelihood of the feared event? So, for instance, that the plane will crash, or overestimating the impact of the feared event. For instance, I will get below an 80 on this test that's coming up, or I won't have a good time at the birthday party. And then process those risks objectively. How likely is it to happen? What happens if it does? So in general, we want to shield our kids from the negative or unwanted thoughts, but you're really trying to balance these short-term challenges versus long-term resiliency. It's okay for our kids to stub their toe and to skin their knees. That's not the end of the world. It's not okay to put our kids in situations where something catastrophic can happen. Well, if he runs out in the street and he gets hit by a car, well, he'll learn not to do that again. That's bad parenting, and don't do that. But giving them opportunities to where they have these small failures that are not catastrophic failures, that's not bad. That's okay. When more is needed, professional support comes in when anxiety is affecting the child every day. It's had a long-standing effect. It's not related to finals or an immediate challenge, and it's impacting school performance or social performance or just overall happiness. This can come through with a psychologist that can help in developing strategies that work with the child. Most of the time, this involves, the research is that it helps more in working with the parent as opposed to just working with the child. It's not the kind of thing where you drop the child off for an hour and then the shrink solves them. At least I'm not very good at that. A physician can help with medication. Both of these can be used together. It's not an either or. It's potentially an and also. So just want for you to take away that you can do a lot to address your child's mental health. We know you can make it worse. You can also make it better. It's good to help and advocate appropriately. There are situations where they need your help because they can't navigate it themselves, but allow them opportunities to do that at a level that's appropriate for their development too. The development of resiliency, I really want to emphasize this. And when challenges persist that go beyond what you're able to manage, that's where professional support can potentially come in. So thank you very much.
We are running a few minutes behind, but we are going to take a couple of questions here, following which we will have a short break. So does anybody have any questions for Dr. Reynolds?
Yep. What would you suggest in terms of teenagers with ASD that are really having but very
Oh, that's a tricky one. So teenagers with challenges with communication but who are struggling with anxiety. I'd look at more of the nonverbal strategies that help them to be able to calm themselves down. So when we think of anxiety, we think of it in terms of what's the thoughts that are going through the head and then the body. There's a connection with both of these things. So the thoughts that are going through the head we address more verbally, typically, but the stuff with the body, teaching them about breathing techniques, sometimes meditation can be helpful, but things that are going to help them to be able to slow the body down, those can often have an effect, which you can do once you teach them with minimal kind of a language load to it. So that's a really short version. Yeah.
Any advice on causes that have been so much of the set that
Yeah. Oh boy, that's a big one. What you're trying to do is to do some modeling for our kids. So if our kids see us freak out when someone cuts us off in traffic, they're going to know that that's an appropriate thing to do. A lot of it has to do with how we're responding ourselves. And certainly I've learned as a parent that I can do stuff that are bad habits, and then my kids copy those, and then that's not a good thing. So modeling is a part of it. Reinforcing them when they're doing things that are effective. And kind of picking the battles in terms of when our kids get really upset and dysregulated. As you go into elementary school, you'll probably hear more about zones of regulation. And the really short version of that is that when a child is freaking out and dysregulated, that's not the time to use language. So we want to be try to keep them from getting to that level. But when they get there, because they all do, on or off the spectrum, we don't use a lot of language. So being able to just work calmly with them, keep instructions really simple, let's take a break, have a seat, things like that, as opposed to, come on, this isn't anything to get worried about. Remember when we did this last time? You went to a birthday party already and it went okay. Remember that? Blah, 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 blah. They're not able to process that much. So we want to keep the language load as simple as we can.
How would you structure the physical activity? Morning, afternoon, both, or
I think that kind of depends on the kids. Some kids really need those naps, and so that's going to impact their ability to do physical things in the afternoon, and some kids don't. So that's more, I think it's more the idea that you have some physical activity and you put in some fun stuff. We talk a lot about structure and having things that are predictable, and that's generally a good thing, but we don't want to be totally regimented either. Sometimes life throws us a curveball, and it's okay that you don't get the special plate because the plate's in the dishwasher. So giving them generally a lot of structure, but not being a slave to it, if that makes sense. So it's a balance.
You touched a little bit on that moving from division 1 to 2 range. Any thoughts for those of us who are living that right now and seeing the challenges when we've had these anxiety issues since recently? Yeah, that are still unable to fix?
So we look at the strengths that our kids naturally have. Most of our kids on the spectrum are not going to be the ones that are the most popular, have the most friends in school. But, I mean, half of the kids are everything falls on a spectrum. And so if you take the normal curve, lots of kids are shy. Lots of kids are introverted. And so we often do better for our kids on the spectrum when they have a small number of closer friends as opposed to adequate relationships with a whole lot of people. So trying to identify those kids and those parents who are going to be able to engage well in terms of personality fit, but also just simply common interests. So and to be clear, autism is not a common interest. So we make sure that our kids have stuff that they can do with other kids that are fun things to do that they're both going to be able to enjoy. So a lot of it on the parent side, I think, is it happens less organically than you'd like, but it's trying to identify who are kids that potentially can be a good fit. Who does the teacher identify as, when they're hanging out, they seem to have a good time together. So trying to do that and then really working those relationships, knowing that our kids may be less likely to get contact information or to seek that out. It may be more of a parent-to-parent kind of thing. But I think working on those small handful of relationships and making them strong in Div 2 is a good way to do it.
Thank you very much for answering those questions. Back there, I'll bring it over to you in just a moment.